Hey there. I'm Dr. Rich Simmons with Georgia Tech Strategic Energy Institute. Just checking the financials on my phone here. Looks like the Dow is already down 826 points today. We're out here in front of the Federal Reserve Bank in Atlanta, Georgia. And what we'd like to do in this video is take a look at the relationship between the economy and energy. So that raises a bunch of key questions, such as how are they intertwined? Why does the cost of energy seem so volatile? How is this volatility risk managed, given that energy sort of dictates the price of a lot of the goods and services that we use? Why does it pay to have a diverse energy supply as opposed to being solely reliant on one given source? Another question might be, how has investment changed over the last few decades as we've adapted to new forms of energy? And that might be from a business perspective, a government perspective, or even a personal household perspective. And what makes an energy decision economically viable at the same time while trying to be societally beneficial? Just checking in on the Dow. It looks like now it's only down 679 points. With that said, people have often warned me I wouldn't want really to know how the sausage is made. But those same people never cautioned me against learning how the money is made. So let's go inside and see if we can find out. Welcome now inside the museum at the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank. This is a subset of the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank, whose primary role is to oversee U.S. monetary policy, obviously very closely linked to the economy. And now we're going to discuss the linkages between energy and the economy at large. One of the prevailing trends over the last many decades is how GDP growth has maintained a steady trajectory of positive output. And along with that, actually underpinning that, is our ability to convert useful primary energy into electric power. And so you see that the relationship between electricity consumption and GDP output is very closely correlated. While lately we have been much more efficient in our ability to convert raw materials into electric output. This trend is not only true for the United States, it's true for other developed countries and many developing countries. In fact, in the last decade or two, many countries that would probably fall partly in both of those classifications, where they have aspects of developing country status, but also developed country status like China, India, Brazil, have shown very dramatic increases in economic output and energy utilization. Now on the other side of this, we see the reverse trend is true during recessions. When economic output declines, so therefore does energy consumption. Now that gives you a glimpse at the global picture and the way that countries relate to energy use and economic output. But what matters as well to those of us in the front line as citizens is, what does it mean at the household level? So this pie chart is meant to indicate that energy is one of the top 5 expenditures of most US households. Now let's talk a little bit about commodities, right? These have been the underlying foundation for the early barter society. In fact, we have an example of, in Massachusetts, beaver pelts being used as legal tender. That particular one's not going to keep you very warm, but it was a form of trading. And more recently, we can think about energy commodities and the fact that we use gasoline for our cars, electricity from both fossil and renewable resources, other resources that basically provide productive activities. And these become then an economic means of generating output. It's no secret that energy commodities are one of the most volatile compared to all commodities in our market today. And this can make it extremely difficult for households, companies, states, and large governments to operate. There is an uncertainty element, and there's an inability to plan in advance when the energy costs can be dramatically different from month to month. Okay, let's observe in this trend over the last few decades the price of oil, right? That's one of the most significant energy commodities traded globally. In fact, oil and natural gas volatility have been very closely linked to economic growth and recession. The official establishment of the very Department of Energy in 1977 was largely a response to the Arab oil embargo of the 70s. And then lately, the increase in domestic oil and natural gas production that has been booming as a result of the fracking trend has made the U.S. much more globally competitive and helped supplies be consistent, which then has the effect of keeping prices very stable and less volatile. It turns out the price of gasoline has a lot to do with what people decide to buy in terms of cars. You can see on this chart, hybrid electric vehicle sales track very closely with the price of gasoline, which makes sense. As people don't want to pay more for their fuel, they are willing to pay a little more for their vehicle technology in order to use less fuel. This is also beginning to be true with electric vehicles, which of course only recently entered the market in the last 5 or 10 years, and now the EV sales are tracking very closely with the price of gasoline and diesel. Of course, the opposite has been observed, of course, during times of cheap fuel, when the mass market sort of gravitates towards SUVs and large trucks because, you know, the price impact is much less severe. Of course, fuel prices vary substantially around the country as well, partly due to different taxes and policies, but also due to the proximity to the resources and logistics. So it's no secret that what drives the price of gasoline is largely dependent on locality, and I always prefer my puns intended. Most of all the major trends in transportation recently have had an energy angle. Since 2012, the advent of more stringent corporate average fuel economy standards has sustained a decades-long improvement in the fuel economy and efficiency of our vehicles. New technologies have been seen, like we talked about hybrids and electric vehicles. Gasoline and diesel prices have been much more stable, of course, underpinned by this trend toward domestic production and fracking. And then states have imposed a variety of different policies to incentivize clean behavior, energy efficient behavior, and new forms of innovation. For example, in the way that they leverage gas taxes or provide tax credits on electric vehicles or advanced renewable fuels, or policies to encourage carpool access and additional non-cash benefits. When we think about what these trends mean for the future, some analysis suggests that we will witness a large reduction in the use of energy for transportation. In terms of passenger travel, we could see a drop of 14% over the next 3 decades or so. Whereas for vehicle travel, we expect to see that drop by maybe double of that, 30% in the next 30 years or so. Our next hot topic is energy diversity. And by that we mean that hopefully we're reliant on a number of various resources and not a sole source. And we see that vividly in the United States when we compare the electric power sector with transportation. On the Sankey plot, you can see we are drawing from things like fossil fuels and renewables and nuclear to obtain electricity services, whereas for transportation, we're almost exclusively reliant on oil and petroleum. Now, there are several impacts of this reality on costs. First of all, when you have diversity of resources, you have more competition among the generating resources. There is more consumer choice. There are more options with reduced environmental impacts. This reduces volatility, and it also contributes to lower economic risk. In short, this helps keep electric rates stable because of this diversity. And because we have a scaled array of resources, we are not solely reliant and not subject to that volatility that we see during times of shortage. Of course, there are still some very dramatic regional differences across the country, as observed here when we look at the average rates that Americans pay for electricity on a per kilowatt hour basis. For instance, the rates in California and often the northeastern states can be 50% higher than they are compared to the national average. In Hawaii, we see that might be 100% higher. And so they are very motivated to try to replace the conventional resources with something renewable. In fact, Hawaii has set a directive to displace all conventional resources in favor of renewables by about the 2045, 2050 timeframe. So we see that prevailing rates have important implications on which generation resources can be competitive in which markets. So now, whether you are tracking monetary lending rates set by the Fed or your favorite financial stocks in the Dow Jones today, we hope this little glimpse into energy as the economic engine for America has been super valuable. And so please be sure to tune in to our next energy video on energy and the economy, where we'll dig down into the cost of electricity, understand how they compare and what's behind them in terms of renewables and fossil fuels, as well as what's underneath the price of gasoline and where those trends are heading in the future world. So stick around for that.